Hello and welcome along to the Rugby Pod. Big Jim and Goody are here as usual, and we've got some good news and some bad news. What do you guys want first?
Always the bad first, and then finish on a positive.
Okay.
Either way, we're getting both of them, so it doesn't matter.
Okay, well, the bad news is that we're taking a 2-week break over Christmas before returning on the 5th of January. But the good news, and it's big news,
We're back.
we're back. The Rugby Pod live shows are back.
Oh,
It is. We are.
Yes. I
I've
can't wait, pal.
I've never been hungrier, thirstier, more wanting, more desperado than I am now for a live show. When? Where? How?
Wow.
Send location.
Now.
The location is the Clapham Grand in London. Have you guys been there? Great venue. Great venue.
How loose is that place?
Very, very loose. And it's going to be on Thursday, the 4th of February. And it's ahead of the first round of the Guinness Six Nations. So she's all go, boys.
I mean, I'll be the first one to sign up. Well, am I already signed up or not?
I think, yeah, we'll buy tickets as well, Jim, and just hand it out to some clacker.
Easy. And out to some clappers. Clapham, get it?
Yeah, we'll buy some tickets and just hand them out, Jim. I am so looking forward to that now.
Tickets go on sale on the website on dice.fm on Friday at 10 a.m. So make sure you put it in your calendar as a reminder so you don't miss out, because there will be limited places.
Roll that dice, everyone. See what I've done there, because it's got dice in there. Yeah.
Well, Dice FM, though. We're a radio station now as well.
Dice.fm.
Nice. Looking forward to it, mate. Can't wait. How good will a Guinness and blackcurrant taste at a Rugby Pod live show with thousands of people? They call it hundreds of thousands of people there. Clapham Grand, socially distanced. Oh,
How's your week been, boys?
I don't know. It's just same old, isn't it? It's been the same old. Although I was worried about Jim for a bit, I'll be honest. I was trying to get hold of him for a couple of days. We played a bit of telephone tag, and then he just went missing on me. What happened, Jim? Where have you been away? Where have you been?
I just went under the radar. I had to have some days to reflect after I did an Andy Good and put out a tweet before I eat or when I eat that fired me up a little bit, more because of the interactions, but we can get into that. But yeah, I just went IMO, whatever it's called, HIM, what's it called where you go under the radar? Under the radar. MIA.
Missing
What's
in
that?
action.
I went missing in action. I did. I went missing in action for a few days. Got nothing for you at all. It's the lead up to Christmas. I don't feel very Christmassy. Can you go into shops? I don't know. Well, I've been in, so I know you can. Is that play on? Do you go for coffee? Can you have more wine in coffee shops? Not what I've seen. I am looking forward to Christmas, I'll be honest. It's been a tough year for everyone, for the Hamilton household especially. So we're looking forward to Father Christmas coming down the log burner. My son JJ's 9, hopefully he doesn't listen to this, his mate's might. He's asking me, he's quizzing me, he's making me pinky promise every night before bed that Father Christmas is real. I am a bad father. I'm a liar. I'm a liar and a manipulator. He says his mate Ryan at school is laughing because JJ believes in Father Christmas. Who's going to be laughing on Christmas Day when Father Christmas is squeezed through the log burner? Who's going to be laughing?
I thought you were going to say he was going to be laughing when JJ just knocks him out, because, you know, JJ's pretty hard for his age, isn't he?
You can't say knock out. You can't.
You can't say that. But I'm intrigued to know what goes on in your household, Jim, because you've got 4 kids. Yeah, well, we know that. But I can't imagine I'm sat there chatting to the boss in my house about Christmas presents for the twins. And it's a relentless, should we get them this? Should we get them this? What do they like?
You're Amazon, aren't you? You're Amazon all day long.
Yeah, I ain't going out to any shops. So I don't do that. Online shopping is completely the way forward. So the missus has got a voucher to get something for the kids. That's her present. And the kids have got a ridiculous amount of presents already. But do you just leave it to the missus?
I'm very good at Christmas. As you know, Andrew, from the Secret Santas we done when life was good.
Well, you never bought any, so.
What, it just didn't come? The idea
Beer 52, some white company.
Manscaped, you've got one of them ear trimmers that you can use on any orifice of your body, which is called the Weed Whacker from Manscaped. But I'm good at buying presents, genuinely, I am. My missus is absolutely shocking. One year, she bought me a floating globe.
What's one of them?
Exactly. How shit. This globe... It's like a lava lamp globe thing. It's a floating globe, lads. I mean, why are you trying to make it more difficult than it is? It's a floating globe it's a fucking globe that floats. Like,
well, maybe she's thinking that you describe yourself as a globe trotter, an explorer,
a global phenomenon.
Yeah, so maybe she's listening to the pod. Maybe she's listening to the pod. Why don't you tell her now what she's got for Christmas?
Manscaped. She's got the weed whacker. Such a great husband. I'm very thoughtful.
Well, if you haven't got yourself sorted yet, you can treat your balls to the best Christmas present they could wish for. Manscaped are supporting us again. They're the very best in below the waist grooming, and they're offering precision engineered tools for your family jewels. Just head to manscaped.com and get 20% off and free shipping with the code RugbyPod. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using the code RugbyPod. Your balls will thank you. Well, we'll get into the Champions Cup action later, but there's been a bit of news going on in rugby this week. So let's catch up on that first. You guys know the pools for the 2023 World Cup in France. Have you had a look at those?
Oh, good night, Scotland. No quarterfinals again, eh, Jim?
What's Scotland got to do? You're tweeting that, and people who are Scottish probably are coming at you on social media. What has Scotland got to do with it? What about any other team? What about Wales with Fiji and Australia?
Well,
what do you mean they're going to struggle to get out of their group as well? What are you on about?
Mate, you ain't Welsh, mate. So I like to keep it real between our little circle. I like to keep it real. Scotland, you got Ireland and South Africa as the first two seeds, as it were, and your third seed. You ain't getting to the quarterfinals again, Jim.
I tell you how we'll get to the quarterfinals. If Eddie O'Sullivan comes in and goes through that 3-2-1-7-9 play with the pod out the back, with the rush defence decoy stuff out the back, with the boot over the 3 and the 2 and the 1, we can beat Ireland. If Eddie O'Sullivan comes to the fore and helps us out of our group, we're going to struggle. As it seems, who knows though? It's a long time away. I'm thinking, why are they doing it now as well? Why now? Why Christmas? Why?
Well, it's a Christmas present to all the Scottish fans that you ain't getting to the quarterfinals. But no, mate, it is strange. We are 2.5 years out from a World Cup, and they're doing the draw now. I don't get it. It's all around the World Rugby rankings as well, isn't it, at the minute, and how things have gone on there. And I presume it's set in stone as to how early you have to do it around those rankings, because we're going to see a lot of change. Listen, the World Cup's a hell of a long way away, but out of all the nations, tier 1 nations, you're happiest being England, because we've got Japan and Argentina. I mean, we may as well put the kids out and we'll win that.
So arrogant.
Well, so humble, you mean?
So honest, so on it. No, but I mean, listen, Argentina just beat New Zealand, so that is going to be tough. They've come in as tier 3 seeds. But yeah, I mean, poor old France. What about the geezer that did? He's a chef. He's come on. He's done an interview. He's French, and all he's got to do is select the tier 1 teams. And the first one he pulls out in France's group, oh my New Zealand. He's getting lynched. He is getting lynched when he leaves that place today.
How good? First game up though.
Do you reckon they'll put that as first game up?
Have to.
I don't think they will. I don't think they will. I think France will be able to manipulate with Bernard Laporte and his history of manipulating things to be able to get a decent game first up, but I don't think it'll be New Zealand. I think they want that to be the crescendo of the group, maybe.
Well, Wales, they're pretty lucky going in as a number 1 seed, but Australia, Fiji and their pool, it's not the easiest running, is it?
Not for Wales. Did they get beat by Fiji?
No.
They didn't, no, but they've been beaten by Fiji, though, haven't they, in recent years? Fiji's beaten them.
2007 World Cup they did.
Just yesterday.
Maybe, yes. I mean, you actually look at it and look at the groups, right? So how many times has Scotland been in the same group as Ireland? How many times has Wales been in the same group as Australia and Fiji? Well, we're just talking about that group. So it's the last 2 World Cups. Wales have had Australia and Fiji in their groups.
Are you saying something's going on?
I don't know, mate.
We've opened up a can of worms on a lot of things in recent years. It just seems to be getting worse. Should we just open it up on air and just say there's some dodgy dealings going on? Joking. With that big now, we have to say that at the end. We are joking, or are we? Rhetorical.
Well,
don't answer.
Yes, Jim. But I did tweet Bill Beaumont today, our chairman. You're the vice chairman, Jim, and he tweeted a picture about him watching the online viewing for the World Cup draw. He says, I'm watching this like everyone else from home. He's got his eyes closed. He ain't even watching it. So it could be, Jim. There could be something dodgy going on.
Was P-Show there?
I don't think he was there now, mate.
Or was he?
There's been some tough news about a couple of your former teammates, Gertie, being diagnosed with early onset dementia, and Steve Thompson and Alex Popham are among a group of players involved in legal action against the sport's governing bodies. Have you guys Obviously, you're up to speed with that. What have you made of it?
I suppose there's three things to look at. And firstly, and most importantly, you feel desperately sad for the players and the families involved in it, because to have any issues with your brain, early onset dementia or CTE at the age of 40 is horrific. It's frightening. You've got kids. It's really, really sad. So first and foremost, from my perspective, I hope the guys are okay. And there's obviously other guys, Michael Littman over in Australia, who I played with for England a couple of times, who's been heavily affected by this as well. And some of the other players that haven't put their names out to it yet, but there's clearly more than just these three players that have been talked about. So it's incredibly sad, and you hope that they're as well as they can be. And then I suppose secondly and thirdly, you look at what they're trying to do is raise awareness and change things for the better for the here and now around the contacts that players can do in training, which I think is, across the board has been reduced compared to when Jim and I were back in the day at Leicester. And as we educate ourselves more and more about these things, you take more and more precautions. Obviously, World Rugby brought in the tackle regulations around height and trying to reduce the risk of head-on-head collisions or any head collisions really, which leads us down this path that the boys are talking about. So it's for the here and now to try and help players that are currently playing the game, and that shouldn't just be just the professional game. It should just be all the way down to amateur and even down to kids as to the safety. And we're trying to keep the game as safe as possible. But the reality is it is a contact game, and it's a game that contact is imperative to win a match of rugby. So you can't just have no contact in the week and just get ready and go and play a game at the weekend, because there'll be other risks around your body not being prepped for that physical battle. And we don't want to change the game too much, because it's a game we love, but we need to try and make it as safe as possible. And that's what they're trying to do. And you appreciate what they're trying to do around that for the here and now, and moving forward around, trying to make player safety paramount. And then thirdly, you think about the litigation that they're coming up with. And that's where I disagree. I'll be really honest. I don't agree with potentially suing World Rugby, the WRU and RFU for negligence around failing to protect the players from damages around concussion, which, listen, we all take the field knowing you can get injured. And people will say, oh, you didn't think you were going to give your brain to rugby and all this stuff. But everyone knew going onto the field that you can get concussed, you can get knocked out. And throughout my whole career, there's been care there, and you take the decisions yourself. I got knocked out.
Because that was going to be my question, Goody, because it's not more of a forwards and backs, but the way that you played, and I mean this with respect, no jokes this time, because this is obviously a serious subject that I want to get into as well. How many times do you think you got concussed in your career? Because you weren't a very combative 10, were you? A kicker, you were a playmaker. But how many times do you get knocked out, do you think, roughly?
I can distinctly remember 6 times in my career getting concussed and coming off the field. One time was I played for Saracens, of all places, against London Irish, and I got completely sparkoed, stretchered off, woke up in the changing room. Didn't have any recollection of it at all. But yeah, you're right. Certain players will have way more collisions and contacts than others. And I played 18 years professionally, mainly because I avoided contact as much as I could. But that was because as a ball player and as someone that kicked it, you have those choices. You see a brick wall in front of you, and I'm thinking, give it to someone else to run into it or kick it. Whereas those other players that I'm passing, you got no choice. You just got to hit it up. So I completely understand. And my perspective is, everyone's perspective is going to be different on this. And whilst from my side, the message is around what they're trying to do to raise awareness of the dangers of it and the sadness of actually what they're dealing with now. I've got so much sympathy around that and completely agree that we need to air these views and try and protect the players and make it as safe as possible moving forward. But I can't get on board with the litigation, and that's just my honest opinion.
Well, let me give my views on it then, because as we know, I put a tweet out saying we signed up, so we knew what we were signing up for. And it came across as maybe a little bit insensitive. That was never meant to be the case. I was always going to put some context with it. I hadn't seen the interviews, especially Alex Popham's one with his family, which was extremely sad. I had a lump in my throat watching that. But I still stand by the tweet that I put out. And again, we've spoken about social media before, and I've spoken about contextualizing things when you put it on social media, or even when you put it into text. Parts of our podcast before have been put out in the media, and it reads very differently to the way that we talk about it. So let me just reiterate, I was gutted to watch Alex Popham's statement on BBC, especially with his wife, seeing him with his kids. But I also stand by my statement when I say that we signed up. Now, you look at this in a number of different ways, and people are coming back at me on social media. For the first time ever, I was getting raging, reading the stuff. People are like, wow, what do you mean you signed up? You signed up for Dementia, you signed up for this. No, that's not my point. Okay, we signed up to play professional rugby at a very early stage of its infancy, when there was nothing, right? There was nothing around concussion. There was nothing around brain trauma. I signed up for that at that time, at that moment. Now, I've lost a little bit of sleep over this because, one, you'd read the messages on social media. I had people contacting me personally, both for and both against the statement that I made. But also because, again, what I put out on social media, dementia's rife in my family. My granddad and my nan both passed away with dementia this year. But the other part of that is the way that I played the game, right? Now, I think back about some of my experiences. I'm not going to name the clubs because who knows where this is going to go. My first big concussion was in a pre-season game. I've gone to dive on the ball. The scrum half has volleyed me in the head, right? Knocked me clean out. In the meeting, there's a countdown, or there's a count up. 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 20, to when I stand up. So I'm on the floor for 20 seconds, KO'd. Stand up, everyone's cheering. Hooray! They're going nuts, and you were rewarded for getting back in the line and showing that manliness and that, whatever you want to call it, stupidity, what it is now. I think about other parts to the game in which I was involved in. Again, it was interesting interviewing Jamie Cudmore, and his situation is different with Clement because they knew the situations around him going back on the field. But Jamie Cudmore played very similarly to me. Used to go around.
He was a lot harder, though.
He was a lot harder. He was. I'm happy to say that. Mate, we used to go around fucking people up in the rucks, like old school, hitting people. Spoke about it before, joked about it. Maybe we shouldn't joke about it. Knee and Alan Wynne-Jones in the head. Now, you go onto YouTube and there's Rugby's Biggest Thugs. You type in my name, Jim Hamilton, Rugby's Biggest Thugs. I look at that and I'm not proud when I watch what's on there. There's a clear out for Scotland against South Africa where I launch into a breakdown, clear out Francois Lowe. He ends up getting stretchered off the pitch. Stretchered off, spinal board, the lot, right? I'm involved in these situations. The biggest one for me was around me personally. I was at a club, played a game, really physical game. And I remember me and Beck went to London, right? Went out for a bit of meal. And as the paparazzi are out in these restaurants, I thought they were taking pictures of me, but they were taking pictures of each other or whatever. But I saw a flash in the corner of my eye. And I started to feel weird in this restaurant that we were in. And I had to go outside of the restaurant. Next thing, I am having a full-on panic attack outside with my missus. I'm meant to be hard as nails, top 10 second rows. I'm outside having a full-on panic attack, saying, I think I'm going to die. She's like, what do you mean? I couldn't, I was stood in the middle of the road and I'd lost all my vestibular, all my balance had gone completely. That lasted for 4 months. Within that 4 months, I played and trained every single week. I was playing for the team at the time. I was coming in at half time and I could barely stand up because of the changing room, the noise and stuff like that. Not once was concussion mentioned at that point. At the time, only till recently did I realise that was concussion, right? That was concussion. Now, if this catches up with me for whatever reason, which it might well do, we're watching the stuff unfold. I was up in bed till 4 a.m, looking at all the stuff around CT. I've done it before. Who's to blame? This comes back to my point. Who's to blame?
Who do you think's to blame?
Me. I signed up for it. I didn't have to play professional rugby. I didn't have to take another contract. And look, there's a fine line between people saying, oh yeah, I signed up and wrecked my knee. I signed up and wrecked my back. Yeah, of course. No, I completely get that. But this is your brain. This is something completely different. This isn't signing up to wreck your knee. We're talking about concussion. We're talking about heads. We're talking about dementia. We're talking about serious business. You can get your knee replaced. Ask Goody. You can go down that point. My point is that I signed up. I had a choice. Okay? I had a choice with everything that was presented to me at that time in terms of what the risks were. So if I had another shoulder operation, what the risks were with that. Oh, you might not play again if you have this operation. You know? I nearly lost my eye playing in the game. Now, the guy said to me, you're very lucky that you've not lost your eye. So I had a decision. My last contract was joked about it on here. We spoke about London Irish to sign a 300 grand deal and take the money to keep playing and risk the chance that I was going to wreck my neck even more, wreck my back even more, have more concussions. At that point at 34, I said, no, I'm done. I'm done. I look at players now that are playing the game who I think should not be playing rugby because of the injuries that they've had. Top level internationals playing the game. I'm watching them play and I am thinking, you should not be playing rugby. But that is your choice. That's their choice. And I was on the pitch and I spoke about my issues of concussion. I was on the pitch in 2011. Kelly Brown got flatlined, KO'd in the game. Playing against Argentina. And I was like, wow, that doesn't look good. Al Hargreaves from playing for Saracens, flatlined, KO'd, snoring on the pitch. And I'm like, I know that can't be good. I know that can't be good for him. I know that can't be good for us. But I'm still going back to training, still looking for my next contract, still buying the nice car. And I know there's a superficial thing with this. And this is just this is, I sound like an American. This is my truth. This is what I think about it. My issue would lie is if the doctors at the clubs that I was at the internationals that I was playing, knew by me doing X amount of contact, X amount of games, was going to cause something in the future. That's what's happened in NFL. Stuff was covered up around that. They had knowledge, you know, and the question is going to come down to, did the governing bodies, did World Rugby, did the unions have knowledge of concussions, head knocks, that it would then cause what we're seeing now in all sports, not just rugby. Let's remember, we're talking about NFL, football's the same. Anything where it involves contact with the head, we're now seeing because there's more and more stuff out there. So
imagine boxing. Imagine boxing.
Exactly. Imagine boxing. And again, it's not. So let me just get this right for people out there. This is not about the game is going soft by me saying that. I've got kids. I've got 4 kids. I've got a wife. I've got a family. I've just outlined some reasons why I'd be worried because I've got dementia in my family and because of the way that I played the game and the injuries and the concussions that I had. It goes back to my point. I made the choice to sign up for that. Rugby is who defines me. It's who I am. It gave me a life. It gave me everything. I've spoken about it before. Rugby has given me everything, right? And I refuse to start pointing a finger at that doctor, that club, that union, World Rugby, and saying, for whatever happens in the future, it's your fault. It's your fault that I wanted to keep playing. It's your fault that this. You know, if I got to a state, and again, you go back, and this isn't me saying what people should do. There's guys that are playing, right, that have had 10 concussions. If I had 10 concussions, I wouldn't play. Especially now, I'd be like, no, I'm not. Look what's happening. You know, that's now. They've got that choice to make now. And players aren't making that choice. They're just carrying on because they want to get paid because of the experiences. They've not got kids or whatever. We didn't have that choice back then. We didn't know. No one knew. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been a countdown. There wouldn't have been a count up to 20.
Well, we can have an expert legal view on it all now as barrister and expert in all things rugby and the law. Tim O'Connor joins us. How are you, mate?
Good, Andy. Thanks for having me on. Thanks, lads.
Tim, great to have you on, obviously, with everything that's happening now. But can you just kind of outline your expertise and potentially where you can add value to this discussion that myself and Goody, but also our millions of listeners will be engaged with?
Yeah. I'm a barrister in Ireland. I've been involved in looking at concussion, and particularly concussion and rugby, for about 10 years. I've, in terms of writing on it, I used to do some blogging, also involved with various other aspects of rugby and the law. I've done some work with World Rugby recently and some of their policy decisions. But rugby and concussion generally, and particularly concussion and rugby, has been one of my main research and just general interests in the game for quite a while. So I'd be reasonably up to speed on the history and the background of it, as well as some involvement in litigation.
And then with that, I mean, it's great to know that you've been doing it for 10 years, and that's part of this whole litigation, I presume. What are your thoughts on where we are and the news that we've heard about with your legal hat on, but also as a lover of rugby? Where do you sit with this whole debate that's going on at the minute?
The most loyal answers, it's complicated. There's a lot of back history. The first thing is everyone keeps referring to the NFL litigation because that's the one everyone knows about, and that was the big ticket one, and everybody saw it and thinks, a collision sport has this problem, therefore this collision sport must have this problem. This isn't the first concussion litigation. I mean, as you know, Killian Willis and Sale had his case, which I understand is now settled. Jamie Cudmore is his ongoing one in France. And I mean, from memory, I think you both played in France. I know you have, Andy. So, I mean, you're aware that, there's the difficulties in the different legal systems and the different cultures in the game when you're trying to do that as well. There's ongoing litigation in Ireland with Damien Brown, the ex-Connacht player, dealing with that as well. So, I mean, these aren't the first. It is high profile and it's big news, but whether or not it justifies some of it in terms of the effect in the game worldwide, I'm not sure. What it is that it's desperate for the players involved, because if you have the guys who have these diagnoses which they got from doing something they loved. I mean, that's even outside of the issue about what's going to happen in litigation, how people are going to feel about it. It's upsetting for all of us to know that guys who we admired, guys who some you would know much better than me, that we've seen this happen to them, and that is upsetting for anyone who loves the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And we spoke about it there. Seeing the interviews with the players and hearing the stories and having friends who've been affected by the concussion. This is the first time we're starting to hear about the onset dementia, though. I think that is the really interesting is probably the wrong word, but the probably key point that we're talking about here, because we all know about concussion now, or we're learning more and more about concussion. There's things in place for concussion, the protocols. I think rugby are leading that. I think that they do extremely good work, obviously, off the back of a lot of research that's been done over recent years. Are there any links that we've seen between concussion and this onset dementia where potentially this is where we're going to see problems in the future for the game of rugby, is that players are now coming into their 40s, into their 50s, having played the game professionally, the physicality that was involved in that, and they're starting to see problems now that we think might be able to link back to repeated concussions in rugby?
Two separate aspects of that. We may well see trouble for the game in terms of there may be guys have this, because in terms of, say, what the player culture was like back then. I mean, you remember, say, that your teams made a virtue of were having scraps on the training pitch in the culture of that time, and just that there was that culture of we're hitting each other harder, so the games are easier. There was that background then, so that there may be more cases of this. As well as that, we just simply didn't, we as in general knowledge, wasn't the same at the time. So that Bennett Omalu stuff on CTE in American football in the NFL, from memory, that was only 2005. The Zurich Consensus, the first overall general sport-wide management process for concussion, was 2007. The first programs to start managing concussion really only started about 2003, 2005, 2007 in South Africa. So a lot of this, what you're seeing now is guys who would have shipped a lot of damage before we knew enough to deal with it. So you may well see more cases of this. It's the difference then between seeing cases of this and is there going to be a legal liability down the track. One thing which I think has to be stressed is whatever happens in terms of the litigation, there's a legal duty, and then there's a question of a moral duty. And it's fair to say the game has a moral duty to try and look after the players, because these guys and their families are going to have, anyone who's diagnosed like this, they're going to have difficulties, and there's going to be the ongoing problems. So which or whether as a sport, I think that rugby has to look at a way to try and provide for people who are going to be facing this, both, I mean, obviously for testing people as well, just to reassure some of them that, yes, this is, to put minds at rest, but also to help deal with the difficulties they're going to face, that the families are going to face, and to help deal with that, even aside from any legal liability. And also education and management to make sure this doesn't happen in the future, or at least we minimize it as much as we can.
Yeah, I think the big thing on it is obviously everyone wants to learn more around CTE and the onset of early dementia and what can be done to safeguard the players as much as possible. But in reality, the big talking point is the litigation. Yeah. And with your legal hat, do you think there's actually a case to answer for? How could you see it panning out if you were potentially involved in it?
I'm not involved, so what I can't give. I know that Professor Jack Anderson had a percentage, but what I would say is I can see the argument they're making, but I can also say that I think there's difficulties. It's to some extent we're going a bit on what we're getting from press releases. We don't know everything. We haven't seen the claim lodged, so we're going to some extent what they're saying in the press release. What they're saying is that it's going to be in England and Wales, the WRU and the RFU, so that's one jurisdiction legally. They're not doing it, or they don't seem to be doing it at the moment, in France or Scotland or South Africa, which are different jurisdictions, so it's just England and Wales. So what they're saying is it's a negligence, that means breach of duty, that you did a duty of care which they breached, and that because of that people got hurt and there should be liability. So one of the big questions is who owes the duty of care? Now, they said they're suing the unions and World Rugby. What you have is you've got a chain upwards. So the essence of CT is because it's lots and lots of low, chronic impacts, not just one big acute concussion that causes something dreadful on the pitch. It's lots and lots of low impacts or, subconcussive impacts or, concussions that weren't properly managed and accumulated, and that then leads to a chronic issue years down the track. Most impacts are going to happen at club level, training, club games. I mean, so if you say a 30-game club season and 10 games max, let's say 10 games in a busy test season, you're going to be playing even for test players, 2 or 3 times more club games than you will test games. You'll be doing vastly more club training sessions. So most of the impact is going to be at the club level. So the question is, who has the primary duty of care there? And is it the clubs? Are the clubs going to be in the focus for this? Certainly I could see, say, the unions who are sued joining in the clubs saying, we put our policies in place that you are then to follow. Did you follow these? You are the guys who are supposed to be doing this on the ground. So the clubs are probably, it's quite likely you'll see clubs joined in that way. Above that again, you'll have World Rugby saying, we were the global policy setter. We set our policies based on what we knew and we've been increasing them. There's a question of, was it reasonable for what was known at the time, or did you do it fast enough? They'd be arguing then, the argument would be, did you do enough to check they were followed, or did you just put in place and not follow it through? It's going to be, a lot is going to depend on what the state of knowledge was at the time as well, and how people were going. There are going to be some difficulties, I think, about what's called limitation periods as well. You've only got a set amount of time to bring a personal injuries case like this. So it's 3 years from memory in England and Wales. So if it's, say, 2017, someone who retired due to concussion issues in 2017, knowing, I'm affected, and I had difficulties in 2017, the time is running there, and it goes surprisingly fast as well. So that's maybe going to be an issue as well. There's quite a bit about law, about duties of international bodies as well, but that gets quite technical from there on.
Tim, I was going to say, so you mentioned 10 years that you've been looking into this. How receptive have World Rugby been? Because a lot of this is going to come back to them being the governing body that looks after rugby across the world, hence the name World Rugby, because this will be the thing is, did they know stuff that wasn't shared? Because again, from a very superficial, and I say that having been a player and been amongst this discussion that we're talking about, and also working in the media and having an air of frustration around some of the law changes around the tackle. We were seeing guys going off for mild, you could say that high tackles, where you would think from a superficial point of view that it wouldn't be cause injury, but you understand why now. We understand why that these are in place, and it's obvious to see with the stuff that's come out over the last few days. World Rugby, Are they doing enough? Do you think they're doing enough?
You always have the problem, is enough, any one is too many, and you're doing your best. They have had, World Rugby were one of the first people involved in the Zurich Consensus in 2007. The first chief medical officer for World Rugby, Professor Mick Malloy, he's a former Irish international who played alongside Moskeen. So, I mean, he played alongside Willie John, and he was one of the guys in it. 2011 was the first time, May 2011 was the first time that actual overall regulations, the concussion regulation about what you're meant to be doing, came into force worldwide. Some unions had policies in there in advance. The leaders were the Kiwis with Rugby Smart. They have been enormously generous to everybody. They helped set up Smart Rugby in Australia, Box Smart in South Africa. What you'll have is World Rugby, we're looking at that. There's going to be differences between unions about who got where and who was first into it. The RFU, for instance, were their long-term injury study in the Premiership, where every year you get, these are the number of injuries, this is what it is, this is going up, this is staying steady. So concussion was one of the ones that they've been tracking since 2004 as part of that study. The incidents, the number of concussions went up quite sharply in 2011 when the regulations came in, which maybe suggests people were now looking for it more and it was showing up more. What's interesting is in the latest set came out about the middle of last week, the incident seems to have gone more or less flat. There's some, but not dramatic ups, some up and down, but not dramatic increases. The severity, the number of days out, has gone up, which means it sounds weird, but it's probably a good thing that means same number of injuries, but more days being taken out for recovery, which means people are taking longer, which shows the culture change. In New Zealand, you had, remember it was about 18 months ago, Sam Whitelock booked himself out of the Rugby Championship game saying, I'm not right. And that was a good indication because he would have come up now through that education, through Rugby Smart, all the way up where it's become normalised. And they have that culture of, don't do this, you're not going to perform. So that helps a lot. World Rugby have done a lot of investment in things like, the tackle management, the stuff that Ross Tucker particularly has been doing with the videos, analysing what causes concussion, the stuff they've done on tweaking introducing the HIA and then trying to make it better and make it better. It's never going to be perfect. It's always going to be ongoing. But things like you were mentioning the high tackle sanction framework, a clear mechanism to say, look, this is going to happen and this is why it needs to happen, to get tackles away from where our research has shown causes concussions and trying to get that in. So they're certainly aware of it and they've been taking it seriously because there has been other litigation. I mean, they know that. They know that the game can't turn a blind eye to it. It has to pay attention to it at the least.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the show. Very enlightening. Thank you once again for coming on and sharing your thoughts on the case.
Pleasure having me on, lads. Thank you.
Top bloke.
Top bloke. He's come on and he's absolutely mind-boggled you, hasn't he, Jim?
Not really, because I was up till 4:30 looking at some stuff. And law, to be fair, law and the terminology and the Arctic terminology that's used, Arctic, what's it called?
Arctic? That's cold, mate. That's
from the 1800s or whatever it is, the same terminology that these government... Archaic, there we go, same one. But look, we need to get used to it, don't we? We need to get used to this terminology now going forward because it seems like it's not going to go away. That comes back to maybe my overall feelings around it is, where does it leave the game? Where does it? Because now, if you're a parent and all these things, I'm not saying, wow, you just get your kid involved with rugby because it's really good and gives you a good lifestyle, because I said it does, and so does a lot of other people, and you get to play in good stadiums. It's not obviously just about that. Safety is paramount. Again, I go back to the point, I didn't push my kids in to play rugby. JJ wants to play rugby. I want it to be safe for him. But where does it leave it? Well, the game isn't in the best place anyway, and now it's another light being shed on it that, well, I was going to say that it doesn't need, that it does need, and hopefully stuff comes out of this. And just finishing my point from what we spoke about before, we've always said on here there's too many games and there's too much contact and training. We've always said it. So that is something I think absolutely needs to change. Would a global calendar help that? Maybe. You know, you look at, again, there's an argument, the powers that be, money, TV rights. We'll look at the pandemic stuff that we've just gone through. There's 2 games in a week. It's too many games. It's too much on teams to play. So I think rugby has got a lot of work to do. It really has, but I stick to my convictions, as it were, that it's, at that point in time, we signed up to play the game, Goody. That's what we signed up to do. And I had a choice to carry on personally. I chose to retire because I was fucked, both from a neck, a back, head, everything. I was fucked from head to toe. And I don't know. I don't really know what else to say on it.
And we can have a chat now about where rugby's at medically in terms of sports science with a man who knows Steve Thompson from his days working with Northampton Saints, a consultant in trauma and orthopaedic surgery and professor of sports medicine. Bill Ribbons joins us. How are you, mate?
Good afternoon, everybody.
Hey, Bill. Thanks for joining us, mate. It's obviously talk of the rugby world at the minute, especially in the UK and Ireland. What do you make of everything that you're seeing unfold now? I know you work with Steve Thompson, obviously the story of Alex Popham's out there as well, Michael Lippman. It's quite harrowing stuff when you look at it, but from your professional, I suppose we'll go with first, perspective on things, how are you seeing the last few days or even the last few years from your standing?
Yeah, so like everybody, as you said, enormous sadness, Jim, what's happened. And like everybody, I want to send my best wishes to all the players and their families involved. I think last week was a terrible week for rugby in general and everybody involved. And I have to say, for myself, I had to sit as a doctor and reflect on my experiences going back 25 years, when the game went professional, and just looking at what had happened and what could anybody have done to try and reduce the amount of injuries. My involvement with Northampton Saints and, on a pitch side basis and peripherally with England on a few occasions, really stretched from that period, 1995 to 2010, that first 15 years. I'm still involved with a lot of professional sport and also kind of regional rugby and things like that. But there's no doubt, as both yourself and Andy experienced during their careers, there was this increase in size. I mean, in that first 10 years of professionalism, the average weight of a Premiership player, both forward and back, increased by 20%. And that was associated with increased power and increased speed. And I know, Jim, because I read your articles, I think it was a couple of years ago in the Sunday Times, you expressed the concern that time that player game management needed to be looked at. So that was quite prophetic 2 years ago in order to reduce head injuries.
Yeah, and we completely agree. We think there's too many games. But one of the things that you actually said when the game turned professional in '96 was it was the worst thing that could happen for player welfare in terms of the game going professional. And we've seen the differences, the size of players now. Where do you sit now in terms of how everything is around the protocols that are in place, the safety of the players, as someone that's seen the advancement of professional rugby all the way through the ages? So
I wrote that chapter in my book, Knife and the Fast Lane, 2 or 3 years ago. And so what I said was in terms of welfare for players, then I thought the game going professional was perhaps not the greatest thing. Clearly for players like the two of you here, it's been a wonderful thing in terms of your careers and being able to earn a living out of it. And I certainly would never have wanted to have denied anybody that opportunity. I think if you go back to, the early days of professionalism, as you both remember, it was a player that had a concussion. It was a 3-week downtime then. but there wasn't very much in terms of protocols, as you remember. I mean, I was there as a volunteer, on the side. I even had to pay for my season ticket to get in the ground at Franklin's Gardens before I was allowed to look after the players. And I was responsible for every week admitting head injury as part of my NHS duties. So we certainly took them seriously. And I certainly remember having to take some of the Saints and the opposition down to the Northampton General and even admitting one or two and looking after them. Subsequent to that, obviously, as you remember, we then came into the protocols. The formal HIA was introduced 2012, 2013. And of course, there's been extra layers added onto that with concussion spotters, video replays, independent doctors. So in fact, the whole medical side of it has improved. But obviously, there's the two sides of it, isn't there? You don't want the concussions to happen in the first place. And of course, we're all talking about these sub-concussions, which are probably just as important. So you've got to think about the game. And then the second point is obviously the medical side of it. If these concussions do happen, then they've got to be optimally managed. And I've no doubt that things have improved enormously in the last 7 to 8 years. But there's no doubt when you look at the Rugby Football Union audit, if you look at those figures in 2015 and you compare them with 5 years previously, so that early time when you were both very active, there was a quadrupling of concussion episodes, I think, in the Premiership. And that was a real danger period for me when those things were happening.
And a lot of that was around knowledge, and we can maybe talk a little bit about that as well. One of the things that I wanted to ask you about, having been a doctor, actually operated on Steve Thompson, if my notes are correct.
Well, obviously there's patient confidentiality, Jim, but I didn't actually. I didn't actually ever operate on Steve. I did see him professionally with various injuries, and one of the first things I did was to go and look out my records to see if during those consultations Steve ever mentioned anything. I have to say, Steve was one of the fittest guys around. As you both know, there's certain people who seem to spend all their time in the orthopaedic clinics, and there's some that you never see, and Steve was certainly one of the latter. Yeah,
well, he changed the face of hooking for the better in terms of the way that he played. But my point off the back of that, and the fact that you work with Steve, but you also work with athletes, with young men who weren't taking shortcuts, right, to get back on the pitch, but wanted to get back on the pitch as quickly as possible. So when you look at that, and this is around the discussions that we're having, if you could go back, would you change it? Would you change if you know what you know now? So if we know as players now that the way that we played and the fact that I played 5 months, arguably with concussion, I've knocked myself out, how many is too many? When you've worked with players, how difficult was it back then to actually say, look, you need to slow down a little bit, put the brakes on a little bit, you need to look after yourself? Do you think that was in the forefront of players' minds back then?
Absolutely not. And I mean, as I described beforehand, I mean, as you both remember, that it's only really latterly that the clubs, and we're not just about rugby, we're talking about football and cricket as well, have really had a much greater medical presence. I mean, as I said, I was there as a volunteer. You turned up at 2:30 and you stayed for an hour afterwards to make sure that everybody was okay. You may get a call during the week, but that was it. Certainly there was nobody around medically. There was physio-wise during training. So you weren't able to pick up on those more subtle things that were happening. Yes, the big concussions, yes, you would look after. I'd put them in my car, take them to casualty. But there wasn't that kind of daily vigilance that I would like to think that we get now. So, and of course, the other thing that everybody's discussed, and I'm sure the pair of you have also talked about, is really that the attitude of the players and perhaps the coaches. You didn't want to let your teammates down. I know, I played till I was 43 junior rugby. I certainly remember getting home and not remembering what the score was. Everybody just carried on. But my view, and I'd be interested, what the pair of your views is that in that last 5 years, there am I doing kind of still regional rugby and things like that. There's a much more willingness with the players now to say, I think I've had a head injury. And interestingly, what I also see is that their mates, I may get the prop indicating to the sideline, my mate, the hooker, I don't think you're quite right, Doc. Will you come on? And I have to say, the referees in general are much more likely. I did a East Midlands Warwickshire game a couple of years, 2 years ago, and in the second half there was 5 players brought off with a head injury. The referee was absolutely adamant. He obviously didn't know what my background was. He just said, this player's going off and he's not coming back. And I know that 20 years ago, A, there would never have been a doctor there, and secondly, they'd have all played on. So I think there has been a great change, hopefully for the better.
And on that, and I completely agree, obviously the awareness is much higher now, and it's at the front of people's minds, for want of a better expression, around concussion and what we should and shouldn't do. But in terms of a tipping point, do you think, some people have said we've reached it before, do you think this is the absolute tipping point around what we should be doing to make the game much safer? And do you have any ideas on reducing contact completely from training? Would you say you need some contact to prepare your body for a weekend, or is there anything that, with your clinical background, you'd be advocating that the game really takes hold of and follows to safeguard the players?
Okay, well, I mean, as you're both aware, this is the most high-profile cases that have clearly been brought. But there have been 2009 in Ireland, then there was the Cillian Willis case in Sale that all seemed to go, we don't quite know how that finished because it was subject to kind of legal niceties. And in France, as you're all aware, there's a case going on with one of the Canadian players, I think. So this is not the first case. Those clearly related to quite significant head injuries as opposed to longer concussion. But I would like to think, Andy, that this is the tipping point. And my worry is that legal cases are going to take years to settle. And we don't know how it will finish, because it's going to be very interesting and sad listening to the different opinions. As to the changes, and I think it has to come from everybody, doesn't it? It has to come from World Rugby. And of course, we have to remember that the chairman of World Rugby is Bill Bowman, who himself in 1982 had to retire because of concussions at the age of 29. So hopefully he's got some sympathy for where everybody is. But then it has to come from the coaches and the players. So I'm not obviously an expert in training, and I know that some people have expressed the view that if you reduce the amount of contact in training, then it might increase injury risk during the game, and that's got to be finely balanced. And I know, Jim, some of your writing, you've described in the years gone by, about the training at Saracens and how you practice double teaming and things like that. I would like to think that this can be safely reduced. But it will have to be that balance that people more experienced than I am feel that risk between being battle hardened for the game but not overdoing it. Andy, you and I certainly wouldn't know what it's like to be in a scrummaging machine. Jim, you do, but it certainly sounds hearing what Steve Thompson's been saying, that those repetitive scrummaging sessions seem to have taken their toll. As a doctor, and I know you may not agree with me, but I do feel that we do need to have a look at the height of the tackle. The French have obviously had all these trials going on, particularly with university games, to see whether that's reduced it. I know that there was that trial in the championship, I think it was in the cup competition, wasn't it? Yeah. Which they actually had to abandon. And whether that was due to players changing their tackling and tackle style to drop their height a little bit. And I know you may not agree with me, but I think double teaming, particularly if you drop the tackle height, it's going to reduce the target area for the tackler. There's much more likely of problems for those tackling from injury. And I think that we need the evidence, but I think that's got to be looked at as well.
Yeah, that's one of the points that I made around the head-on-head injuries. And again, my comments around that were very superficial from experiences having been on the pitch with players going low, both players going low at the same time, and the clash of heads, or head on hip, head the wrong side, again, there's so many things going on with rugby. It's so fast. It's so fast paced. You can look at so many different individual instances, not just in the tackle, but at the breakdown, the way that players are flying into them, and the list goes on.
I think it was interesting. I mean, I've felt quite strongly for a while about the way that the game is refereed around the tackle. And I noticed Stephen Jones in the Sunday Times yesterday was talking about that fundamental change in 1992, when if you had a ruck or a maul that didn't get, there wasn't an obvious outcome, it was the team going forward that had to put into the restart scrum. And that meant that you didn't have to commit so many people, particularly in defence, to the breakdown. And that caused greater congestion. Whether that gets looked at. And I think, as you've both seen during your careers, the fact that when you're tackled and you go to the ground, certainly compared to 25, 30 years ago, you have more time to fall, present the ball. And that means that the defender has really had to go in higher, not only to take the player around their legs and bring them down, but they really want to smother the ball as well to try and reduce that opportunity to present the ball. And I just feel that needs to be looked at as well.
Right, Bill, thanks very much for coming on the show and best of luck with the book.
Yeah, and a very happy Christmas to all of you.
Good bloke. Yeah, great bloke. Great bloke. Insight there. And there's so many layers to it, isn't there? And he's seen it at the coalface from, I can't believe Northampton Saints used to make him buy a season ticket to be their doctor.
I can't believe Northampton are as bad as they are now.
Mate,
I'm there at the weekend, actually. I'm in Leinster with Channel 4, so I don't want to be too bad to them. But we should have asked him about that. But he's the kind of guy that you want to sit around the table with Christmas, not socially distanced, and just have a blether with. I bet he's got some unbelievable stories, hasn't he?
Well, Champions Cup, boys, it was a pretty good start for the defence of their title, wasn't it, for the Chiefs?
Oh, Jim.
It was close.
Glasgow, how are you?
The ref, I text Kelly after, I said, mate, that ref, I don't even know who it was, I can't even remember, I didn't even see the ref. Oh, what do you expect, really? I feel for Glasgow, I feel for Edinburgh and Glasgow, I feel for everyone in Scotland at the minute, I really do. But one, you're playing against the Chiefs. The difficult thing when I'm watching Exeter versus Glasgow is the talent that Glasgow produced for Exeter in Johnny Gray, in obviously Stuart Hogg. And that's where it's a little bit sad, because what do you expect really when you're sending Glasgow team down there? You're down to your bare bones, literally. Yeah. And you've got a full noise Exeter who are doing a Leinster what they do in the Pro 14, beating everyone week in, week out. And let's not forget, the X-Men, see what I've done there, just brought it back to the book, are champions of Europe. Yes, we are. Yes, they are. Glasgow didn't have a leg to stand on, as it were. What was the final score?
42-0, James. 42-0.
42-0. It weren't 50, but they got zeroed. So you can't go out anyway. But if you could go out, I know Kelly Brown being one of the coaches and what he did in 2010 or 11, saying we couldn't go out if we didn't win, I know that they wouldn't be going out, and rightly so. They got hammered.
Good start from the French clubs as well, wasn't it, Goody?
It was. And it's not a surprise really, because if you look back at the pandemic, so the French top 14 clubs ended their season middle of the pandemic, didn't they? They just said, we're cutting the season now, we're not going to play all the games and force it through. And so they've been going in the top 14 now for about 10, 11 weeks since they just restarted the new season in the normal time around September of when they started. So they're primed. And you look across it, some massive performances. Claremont, obviously, going to Bristol,
that was a good game.
Toulouse on Friday night. Yeah, hell of a game, that Claremont-Bristol game. Toulouse going over to Ulster on Friday night, massive win for them. Bordeaux going to Northampton. You don't necessarily always look at French teams and go, geez, there's going to be four of them that win away from home. La Rochelle beating Edinburgh. I know Edinburgh.
Big shift, Goody, in French ruggers, mate.
Yeah, there is. And I think a lot of it could be looked at as, the way they didn't play during the pandemic, didn't try and squeeze the season to be finished, started their top 14 season as normal. And, you've seen the benefits of that. And listen, there is a huge shift in French rugby. The national team, the amount of players they've got coming through now, they've won the last two under-20s World Cups. So they've got a conveyor belt of young quality players coming through. And, they're a force to be reckoned with again. You look at Toulouse, Claremont, Racing, they're all potential favourites to win this tournament. So yeah, a really good weekend for the French clubs, not so much for the English clubs, but two of us won. Two of the English clubs won. The two finalists, Exeter and the Mighty Wasps.
Who did Wasps even play?
Played the Dragonses.
Oh, did they?
Yeah.
I didn't see that one. I was watching the London Irish game.
So yeah, it was tough one for English clubs. You know, and I think that's a knock-on effect of you know, you see the selection that we mentioned for Gloucester and you know, some of the other teams. Quinn's going over to Munster. Discipline, my discipline.
Oh my Marla. Whose fault is that?
I just blame Rob Shaw. Who are you blaming?
Yeah, I'm going to blame Rob Shaw as well. I'm not really, for the Harlequins haters, just going back to that Lyon-Gloucester game, and I've only seen clips of it. Oh my Bastero. Have you seen the size of him at number 8?
He's got bigger again, hasn't he?
He could arguably be the biggest number 8 in world rugby. My goodness me.
He played well though. Yeah, short bursts, you know, he's getting involved in mauls. That must be horrible, right? If you're a back and you get involved in a mauling session, how sore's your face after mauling?
Ridiculous. The energy sapping. I heard Warburton talking about it on comms. I was like, Sam, you're at the back of the mauls, mate. You don't know what it means to be in a maul. It is energy sapping. But yeah, Bastero. It's I can't see him moving back into the centre from the profile of which he's presented at the minute for the Lyon back row.
He's had a big lockdown, hasn't he?
Yes.
A lot of the teams that lost in round 1, are they going to put out the shags this weekend because of the new fullback?
Yes, for want of a better answer. I mean,
what team did I hear specifically? Was it Northampton? Was it Chris Boyd?
Northampton, yeah, Boyd. So Boyd, they lose to Bordeaux in the last minute, and they put a strong team out. But this is the knock-on effect for me of
too many games.
Well, it's too many games, but this year they've actually reduced the amount of games this year across all competitions because there's no Anglo-Welsh Cup or the Premiership Cup, whichever one it was going to be this year. But they're playing every weekend, so you know, Premiership games, European games. You know, you're playing all the way over the Six Nations, and that's because the season got delayed because of the pandemic. You can't blame China, but you know, the pandemic. The Premiership clubs kept playing the games to finish that season and then start next season. So clubs have to, and we're talking about player welfare across this whole podcast, clubs have to pick and choose their games now. And, you know, with that becomes how much training you can do, how many injuries you've got. And look at Gloucester. So Gloucester's team that they picked, they've got loads of injuries. They picked what everyone looks at as a weakened team to go over to Lyon. So they've basically saying that Europe's not a main priority to them this year because of the situation they're in right now. Now, Northampton, they gave it a crack the first game. They've lost to Bordeaux at home. You've then got Leinster back-to-back, who haven't lost in about 14 years. So, of course, they're going to give younger players experience and change their team. You know, they played them last year twice and lost heavily to them both times in the Champions Cup. So, yeah, teams are going to pick squads that are, you know, relevant to development, to where they're at in the competition. And because it is a short format of 4 games, we're going to see a lot of teams rotate their squad over rounds, certainly rounds 3 and 4. And, you know, we're seeing it earlier in rounds 1 and 2 as well, which is a massive shame, but it's the world we're living in, right?
What do you mean Cipriani should have played against Lyon if he hasn't played?
I've heard he's got a bang shoulder, but I've heard he's leaving as well.
I've heard he's leaving. That's the rumour in the rumour mill.
Where's he off?
Who knows?
There's a few more rumours floating around about Gloucester, isn't there?
What other ones you got?
What you got, Andy Rowe?
Jared Evans, Jaco van der Walt.
Yeah. Oh, actually, well, they must be looking at a 10. That's for sure. Now, I asked my mate Sam Raven, the team manager, the Slug, and he will not give me anything. So I'm not a digger anyway. I'm not a gold digger. She gave me money when I need.
That's
but
good, Jim.
Someone like Cipriani, not that he's a gold digger, but he's going to be wanting money that's worth as much as a gold digger would be. A lot of money, a lot of cash. So if he is leaving, it opens the door for another 10. So I heard Jaco van der Walt. I've heard Adam Hastings. His name's been bandied about up in Scotland potentially.
Yeah, mate. Well, they're clearly looking for a 10, aren't they? And I have heard there's a bit of a fallout between Sips and the coaches. Well, just he wasn't picked, was he, for a game after being dropped in the first game? Sorry, he wasn't picked, was he, after his performance against Leicester in round 1 of the Premiership? And there's just little rumours coming around that
he's injured.
Leave now.
Is he injured or is he, or what?
I think you can find, if you're not getting picked, you can find a knock, can't you? But you can't say that now because, you know, can't even joke about being injured now because of this fucking podcast.
You can't.
But no, I have heard he's got a bit of a niggle, but he definitely just wasn't selected for a couple of Premiership games, and I kind of expected to see him play against Lyon this weekend, but hey, who knows what goes on behind closed doors at Gloucester? That is a mad, mad place.
Are there any other rumours floating around at the moment?
Big one. Duhan van der Merwe, Edinburgh winger, been carving up.
How big?
Really big. South African, Scottish.
Mate, Scottish, what are you on about?
Yeah, South African Scot, so he's even bigger. Now, I was looking, when I heard that he might be looking elsewhere because of the kind of money that he would be looking at. It's
Why is he living in Edinburgh? Because he doesn't like cockers, mate. You can't say that, Jim. You cannot say that.
The money, this is the thing with a team like Edinburgh and Glasgow. You're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. So this is probably a talking subject for another time. So your team do really well, or your recruitment team do really well. They go and look at these rough diamonds around World Rugby, South Africans mainly, Georgians if you're in France. You bring them to your team, Bill Matter at Edinburgh. You bring them to your team, you develop them unbelievably well. They start playing, they get picked to play internationally, and their salaries or expectations of salary go up 3 or 4 times. That's what's happened with Duhan van der Merwe. He's rocked up to Edinburgh via Montpellier, didn't really play. Next thing, he is carving up international, arguably an outside bet for the Lions, out of contract, smart, and say his salary, let's just say was 100 grand or is 100 grand. Teams are offering him 3 times that. So I'm thinking, anyway, back to my point, I'm thinking what club? Leicester? Maybe need another winger with Nemani Nandolo. Expectation is quite high on Leicester naturally because it's Leicester. Who else? What other teams are out there? Anyone would take him. Worcester. Apparently he's going to Worcester.
He's going to Worcester. But that's the thing, though. Isn't that not the evolution of every rugby player, though? So,
yes.
You know, you look back on our careers, and I'll take my career as an example. I did 4 years at Leicester when I was a kid, getting paid kids' money. No problem with it. Earn your stripes. Won the Premiership, 4 times, couple of hunting cups.
Right, mate.
And then I got but this is when you're young. You're a young kid, and you're part of that. And then I got offered 4 times as much to go and play for Saracens than I was on at Leicester. So of course I'm going to go. It was a very tough decision, but that didn't work out. So I went straight back to Leicester. And then further down the line, 6 years later at Leicester, I've been offered 3 times as much to go and play for Brive.
Me on breath.
But that's part of being a professional rugby player.
That's the difficult thing, though, with a team like Edinburgh or Glasgow. You develop them players. So you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. Like, what do you do? Like, I don't get how it's sustainable to be successful. That's the point.
It all boils down to money, doesn't it? For everyone, for the clubs,
money.
The unions, and for the individual as a player. You're always going to think about a bigger offer when it gets put in front of you and work out, move in, how much I'm going to play, how successful that club's going to be. I left Leicester when we just lost in the final of the Premiership to go to Brive, and we were near the bottom of the table to start off with, and I'm thinking, what am I doing here? And then
Brive were bottom of the table.
Yeah, Brive were, yeah. And then Leicester were near the top, and you're thinking, geez, have I made the right decision? But, you internet banking, you sure have.
Thanks, Scooty. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Producer Tim. Thank you very much for listening. Don't forget to hit subscribe on whatever platform you get your podcasts on. Leave us a review and check us out on YouTube as well.
Rugby Pod.
Pod.